I think this room is booming with a sort of transcendental electricity that feels really appropriate to this event, which celebrates the full relaunch of our beloved Kiplin Hall program. It's a long anticipated delight to be here with you tonight. There is a saying, perhaps apocryphal, but most famously attributed to the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, "No man steps in the same river twice." Tonight, I will borrow it to pose a somewhat analogous question. Can a beloved study abroad program hike the same mountains twice? Or, at least, how can it carry forward a set of core experiences, intellectual, emotional, and embodied, after the retirement of its charismatic founders? What tonight's reading seeks is to share an update from that work in progress, and perhaps even more importantly, a celebration of the successful relaunch of Washington College's beloved Kiplin Hall program. It is a Lake District hiking trip largely constructed around the Wordsworth siblings, both William, the poet, and Dorothy, the avid life writer and naturalist, a redoubtable duo who built a rich literary culture around their habit of walking up to 20 miles a day across the fells or mountains in the local Cumbrian dialect. The Wordsworth's example turned the Lake District into one of England's first literary pilgrimage spots, and the fell hikes that follow in their footsteps to Greenhead Gill, Cat Bells, Stickletarn, and my favorite, Pico Stickle. These Lake District hikes encapsulate the muddy boots pedagogy at the heart of this program. Today you'll be hearing some 12 voices sharing accounts of the wonder, questions, and individual transformations that students and instructors carried home after 10 days of immersion in the north of England. All of them will speak to different ways of processing the information gleaned from this place-based pedagogy. Their remarks include accounts of a significant encounter, an intellectual epiphany tied to their encounter with a place, be it a moor, a museum, a mountainside, an archive, a historic home, or an unfamiliar object, as well as the creative writing sparked by these encounters, and even a poem inspired by a packet of Tesco raspberries. These specific instances offer evidence and a roadmap for the kinds of interdisciplinary thinking and experiences that we are designing our now annual trips to elicit. But before passing the microphone, I will take just a few minutes to outline a bit of the history of our program, which I have described as beloved, but is also idiosyncratic, in a way that I hope piques interest as flags for the sort of jubilant eccentricity that tends to convert enthusiasts into scholars of the Romantic period. And I think also gives a sense of the spark that characterizes the true liberal arts education. First, here's a basic outline of core facts. From 1998 to 2016, over 200 Washington College students immersed themselves in a full-body, all-weather exploration of hiking the poetic landscape that inspired the Wordsworths, the Brontes, and even Beatrix Potter. Under the visionary leadership of English professors Rich and Barbara Gillen, and the stout backing of former board chair and interim president Jay Griswold, what everyone refers to as Kiplin Hall became something of an icon for the college, a rite of passage, and the embodiment of our high-touch variant of the liberal arts. And I'm speaking to a room that's mostly familiar with this distinctive liberal arts education, but part of the unofficial motto for Washington College over the past decades has become, have unhurried conversations. When Rich Gillen published his retrospective book account of the trip with Common Ground in November of 2020, he entitled it simply, A Guide to Hiking the Liberal Arts. For the Gillens, this program was a passion project in the best possible way. Their attempt to recreate the famous Wordsworth Conference, run by Wordsworth descendants out of the former Wordsworth home at Dove Cottage, which the Gillens had found so delightful and career-shaping as graduate students in the 1970s. And I think it's really representative of their vision and the Washington College vision that they wanted to deliver that graduate student experience for our undergraduates. For many students, Kiplin Hall served as the apogee of their college career, And it was hearing the impassioned accounts of alumni that eventually persuaded me to take the baton after I was hired as Rich's replacement in 2017. And I just want to say that I'm quite happy I delivered that line accurately, because in the rehearsal I said hired as Rich's assistant in 2017. And that's not entirely untrue, but this is maybe more accurate for the history books. Because before I took that baton, I had some doubts. For one thing, I'd never heard of Kiplin Hall, and neither has anyone I've mentioned it to outside of Washington College circles. When I Googled the totemic phrase Kiplin Hall and pulled up a map near Scorton, Yorkshire, my first thought was, I didn't know that the Lake District was in Yorkshire. Hint, it's not. In fact, it's more like 2 hours of driving and many, many roundabouts away from key Lake District sites around Grasmere and Windermere. But a complex tangle of ongoing institutional affiliations, and might I add here, profoundly meaningful personal relationships, meant that WAC students had been staying for a pittance at the University of Maryland Study Center at Kiplin Hall, itself an odd, and now at least physically non-existent, architectural monument to a resolute crew of Maryland historians' interests in Kiplin Hall as a former resident of the Calvert family, who had helped to found the English colony of our home state. Part of my hesitation was, frankly, fear-based. Rich and Barbara were completely battle-hardened and relished telling horror stories of 20 years of travel. The walkie-talkie years, the many van accidents, the accidental prescription overdose, terrifying but without any lasting harm, I'm happy to announce. The students lost on top of a mountain as a storm settled in, but then found in a pub. Or, most notoriously, the time Barbara Gillen fell face first down part of the mountain, coming to just in time to bark orders to the mountain EMTs coming to her rescue. She was not going in that helicopter. Thank you very much. Carry me out. This anecdote offers only a mild sense of Barbara Gillen's personality. Her indomitable force of will was one part of it, but she also had the street smarts of a veteran third-grade teacher and the organizational mind of a Napoleon. And for 20 years, she dedicated the full measure of her powers to the Kiplin Hall program. All the typical logistics, but also unforeseen tasks, like teaching students how to do laundry, how to cook for 20 people, or how to use a kettle. I've had the opportunity to participate in several readings and talks about Kiplin Hall alongside Rich Gillen, and after one, a woman from the audience approached me to ask, "Do you have a Barbara?" Alas, my answer was no, but what I can now tell you is that it has taken the labor of 4 adult professionals to replace one Barbara Gillen. And here I also do need to add that really relaunching this trip has been the work of an entire village, with not just my fearless co-leaders, Vicki Barnett Woods, Beth Choate, and Roy Kesey, who are all here tonight, but also my home department of the English department, the support of 3 English department chairs, Sean Meehan, Liz O'Connor, and Courtney Rydell, and the directors of all 3 signature centers at Washington College, Adam Goodhart at the Starr Center, Valerie Bruce at CES, and James Allen Hall here at the Rose O'Neill Literary House. A special debt of gratitude is due to Jay Griswold, Kiplin Hall's ongoing champion, and along with the Gillens, the 3rd visionary founder whose generosity and big ideas shine in the program you are about to hear more about. But in 2019, long before we had rallied all these troops for a full interdisciplinary relaunch, Barbara and Rich talked me out of my reservations and gave me the gift of 6 days in the Lake District and Yorkshire with them, my very own Kiplin Hall experience, embodied, earned by long hikes, and gladdened by hours of storytelling and the explication of Wordsworth. With their zest for narrative and their fusion of intellectual curiosity and brass tacks pragmatism, Rich and Barbara shared 20 years of institutional knowledge, the trailheads for epic hikes taken by William and Dorothy Wordsworth, the sheepfolds and ponds referenced in their poetry and journals, and invaluable tips about parking, bathrooms, and grocery shopping. Rich continues to serve as a kindly but unobtrusive mentor, and ended up coming out of retirement to teach a new crop of our first-year students about the transcendental delights of romantic poetry. And actually, I'm just gonna say, if you have had that special pleasure of taking an FYS with Professor Gillen, would you please raise your hand tonight? Okay, so the power rolls forward. But several of his FYS graduates have ended up coming on our trip with us. We're so fortunate that he is not only here tonight, but will be making a surprise contribution to our reading. Sadly, Barbara died 5 months after that last trip to the Lake District. It was a trip she'd made in the face of great physical limitations and pain, still committed to the idea that future generations of Washington College students should benefit from the knowledge and wisdom she'd helped to glean over 20 years of hard work, mishaps, and triumphs. She didn't fall down that mountain for nothing. And while we are still novices in all sorts of ways, making our beginners' mistakes and learning from them, we are also drawing on the legacy of what the Gillens started, re-narrating their lore and walking on trails, even stepping in the occasional river, paths that are not the same, but are richer in our understanding, at least, thanks to our knowledge of the many teachers, students, and poets who have walked ahead of us. And now let's hear from the students. Thank you so much for being here tonight.